Submit camera recording on.
Welcome to this session on talk by Professor Hüsken. I would begin by introducing her in brief. So, Professor Hüsken is currently Director, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University, and Professor and Head of the Department of Cultural and Religious History of South Asia at the South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University, Germany. Her main research focus are Buddhist studies, Hindu studies, ritual and festival studies, gender studies, and the study of South Indian temple cultures. In most of her recent work, she combines methods of textual research, that is Sanskrit, Pali, and Tamil, and anthropology. She is also head of the long-term project on temple legends in South India, funded by the Heidelberg Academy of Sciences. So we have been long collaborating now for around 6 years, I think. It started in 2018, and we have together worked on a DAAD sponsored project earlier. And I welcome wholeheartedly my collaborator and very dear friend, Professor Hüsken in IIT BHU today for delivering a talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vinita. Yes, I think I'm talking into this microphone. So thank you so much for Dr. Vinita Chandler for inviting me here. Thank you all for coming here. That is a true honor to be able to talk to you about a project that is very close to my heart, and not only to my heart, also to my brain. A project that I entitled the lecture today, Between Stone and Story, Integrating Tangible and Intangible Heritage in the Study of Kanchipuram Temple Legends. In the course of my presentation, you will become more aware what I want to convey here. What I want to do is, in the first place, to introduce this long-term project. And when I say long-term, it is truly long-term because it's a project that is funded for 16 years. We're very lucky to have this long-term funding, so we can dive very deeply into the matter of our investigation. Before I go into explaining about the content and the aims of our project, I would like to introduce the, let's say, institutional frame of it, which it is a long-term project funded for projected for 16 years, that is 2022 until 2038. I will be retired by then. It is funded by the Academy of Sciences and Humanities in Germany. So it's federal funding and state funding combined together, which allows us to go deep into this matter. That is a true, as I said, a true privilege, and I can't thank the Academy enough for that. The project is run by me as a prime investigator, and we have two teams. One is placed in Heidelberg, and there the team is hosted by the South Asia Institute. That is the institute where I'm also professor at Heidelberg University, and our Indian branch office is hosted by the École Française d'Extrême-Orient, in Pondicherry. And you see on the right, you see the building where you find the team members of the Indian team. To briefly introduce the team, the Heidelberg team is led by me, and the academic leader here is Dr. Jonas Buchholz. And the Pondicherry team is led by Professor Dr. Dominic Goodall and Dr. Sharma. So we have team members on both sides of, in Germany and in India. But we do work together. So that means, how do we work together? We meet at least 3 times per week online to discuss especially the text, but also other matters of concern. And we do come together either in Germany or in India once a year. So in spite of the advantages, of course, of electronic communication technology, and it's wonderful that we can sit together 3 times a week even though we are not physically in one space, it is at the same time also extremely important to be in one place together, to interact, to get to know each other better, to have conversations over coffee or chai, and so on. So that is both ways of communication and collaboration are really important. So, when I'm talking about temple legends, what am I actually talking about? So, temple legends in our projects refer to the mythological narratives on Hindu temples and other sacred places. And other sacred places might be mandapas or water bodies like rivers or theaters, no matter what, places considered to be especially sanctified in the text through the activities of the gods. These narratives are typically explain the origins of the sacred place. Why is this place sacred? Which god did what at this site? And also at the same time, these texts communicate what we humans have to do at these sites, right? It seems to be by nature that these mythological narratives are extremely difficult to date. In my opinion, these narratives, the texts that we're dealing with, are, I would say, consciously avoiding referring to historical circumstances. So there is, in our text, there is no reference to dynasties, to kings. There's no reference, not even or hardly any reference to let's say, architectural features of the monuments we're dealing with. So it is extremely difficult to date these texts, but we do think that they are of the medieval and early modern periods, and of course they are not all of one age, but they came into being at different times. They are often transmitted as part of the Puranas, as so-called Stala Mahatmya or Stala Purana text. So that means the stories of a place. So, and very often these texts also attribute themselves to certain bigger Purana, saying this is the so-and-so, the Kanchi Mahatmya, which is part of the Skanda Purana. That does not necessarily mean that we will find these texts in the Puranas they attribute themselves to, but it at least is a gesture towards a certain, let's say, affiliation to a tradition, and also a gesture, let's say, a way of lending the Puranas authority, of course, to the text that we're dealing with. So, in our project, we are dealing with the mythological narrative of Kanchipuram as a place. And Kanchipuram and its wider surroundings are in the text consistently called Satyavrata Kshetra. So, where we don't hear of Kanchipuram, but of Satyavrata Kshetra, so the field in which vows come true and in which truth is a very important aspect. These texts are composed in Sanskrit, and some are recreated, I would say, in Tamil, not translated, because the Tamil texts are, while they follow their Sanskrit original very closely, the Tamil texts are, in terms of poetic sophistication, much, they are of a much higher register, I would say, than the Sanskrit texts. So they are very fine poetic texts in Tamil, whereas the Sanskrit texts are very often in a rather simple Sanskrit, in a Puranic Sanskrit, which doesn't mean that this is always the case, but here we see already some of our prejudices thrown overboard to think that always Sanskrit is the high literature, whereas the vernacular is of a lower register. In this case, this is certainly not the case. And we do have, why this place? Because we do have distinct, I would say, sectarian versions of these mythological texts that refer to Kanchipuram. And they are of Shaiva, Vaishnava, and Shakta provenience. But even though they clearly are either Shaiva, Vaishnava, or Shakta, they do work with and convey a common stock of narratives, even though they present these narratives in a very different way. So that leads me, of course, to why Kanchipuram. But Kanchipuram is a city which has a very long known history of continuous settlement. I think the earliest is like the 2nd century BC. And it is like Benares. Kanchi is one of the Sapta Moksha Puri, so there's 7 cities that lead to moksha. And it is religiously diverse, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Shaktism, plus, in at least historically, Buddhism and Jainism. That means that different traditions live very close to each other and necessarily interact with each other. And this interaction makes this especially interesting. At the same time, in Kanchipuram, we find the ancient history and a vibrant living tradition. What does that mean? When we look at our texts, most of the sites that we find mentioned in the text, which are of the medieval and pre-modern period, are still today in existence, and they are under worship. So these are temples that have been established much earlier, but they are still and have been continuously under worship. And that makes it, of course, very interesting for us, and you will soon find out why. So what is this project about? Our project is based on the assumption that temple legends in South India occupy a dual status as both tangible and intangible heritage. What does that mean? As material record in their physical manifestations, that is, as palm leaf manuscripts, as old prints, they are tangible, of course, the texts themselves, but the narratives inscribed in these or transmitted in these texts are also inscribed in architecture, in sculpture, in ritual space, and they exist in a concrete geographical space. In that sense, what we're dealing with is clearly tangible heritage, but it's also intangible heritage, because it is living oral and ritual, these are living oral and ritual traditions which are continuously reinterpreted by the local communities. And together, and only together, that is our argument, they represent a very dynamic form of heritage that shapes collective memory and identity. Having said that, this situation, of course, poses challenges to us as researchers. So how can we analyze this rich cultural resource without reducing it to one medium? And how can we represent the different media of transmission in a non-hierarchical way? And why am I talking about non-hierarchical way? My own, let's say, academic background is I'm a Sanskritist, I'm a philologist. And let's say my disciplinary attitude would be to take the texts and the Sanskrit texts as the main source and satellite everything else around. But the ambition of the project is to not do that, but to take each mode of transmission similarly seriously and allow both ourselves as researchers, but also the people who hopefully will use our resources that we are creating in a way that does not hierarchize the medium, the different materials by a priori. So if you are interested in architecture in the first place, you should be able to pull the material to the front, which deals with architecture. If you're interested in Tamil traditions in the first place, you should be able to have that access. If you're interested in oral traditions of certain communities in the first place, you should be able to pull that to the foreground and let everything else recede to the background, while still having access to all other different forms of transmission. This is, of course, very ambitious, and we're far from being there, but we're getting there, and we still have a few years to go. So, our starting point, because we have to start from somewhere, are a corpus of texts. And the concrete texts we're dealing with are 8 texts with a combined length of more than 50,000 lines. They are, as I said, composed in Sanskrit and in Tamil, and they represent different religious perspectives, Shaiva, Vaishnava, and Shakta. Some are transmitted in old print editions. These are printed editions mostly from the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, mostly printed in Granta, Telugu, and Tamil script. But with very little critical apparatus, so we don't know which manuscripts are in the background of these printed editions. So they're basically, we have to treat them as like we would treat a manuscript too, because they're one witness of a specific version of the tradition. They represent different perspectives, but most of the texts are also preserved as palm leaf manuscripts. So the first task that we have largely fulfilled now is to collect the manuscripts that we find, that we know of in different libraries, mostly in India, some in Europe. Just to give you an idea which text I'm talking about, you don't have to memorize that. So we're dealing with the Kanchi Puranam of Shivanyana Munivar, the Kanchi Puranam of Kachyapa Munivar, Kanchi Puranam of Kachalaya, then the Shaiva Kanchi Mahatmya, the Vaishnava Kanchi Mahatmya, the Hastigiri Mahatmya, which is also a Vaishnava text, the Kamakshi Vilasa, which is the Sanskrit text of the Shakta tradition, and so far unpublished manuscripts of the Kanchi Sthana Mahatmya Sankaha. So these is the core textual corpus we're dealing with. But these texts do exist in manuscripts. At the same time, it is the case that the Sanskrit and Tamil Mahatmya and Tala Puranam texts are actually today rarely read. So they are not the bedtime books neither for the priest nor for anyone. At the same time, the texts are still present in the temple, and in what way are they there? The summaries or extracts of these texts are displayed on signboards or stone slabs in the temples, and they are read by temple visitors. In order to show you what I'm talking about, I put up here two images of the Panamanishwara temple in Kanchipuram. On the right-hand side, we see a big stone slab that has been made by local stonemasons, has been commissioned by a specific donor of this temple, and this is put up on the front of this temple. So if people sit there and take a rest or do something, they often would read these texts and would talk about these texts. Sometimes they would stand in front of these texts and recite them. So they are present in the texts, in the temples, and they do something in the temple. People engage with them. It is important to know that the Mahatmya and Tala Purana texts, the sacred sites that they are talking about, are very different in size and extension. But you would not know this from the text. So the texts do not make a distinction between large temples and small shrines. In fact, temple architecture is rarely mentioned. So a temple like here on the left, the huge Varadaraja temple, which we look down on from the Western Gopram at the moment, could possibly could take the same space in the text, like the Shaktisha Linga, which we see down there on the below, which is just a linga, which is under worship, but it doesn't even have a shelter, not yet at least. But both could be talked about with the same amount of words or verses in the text. So from the text themselves, we do not know much about what the temples would actually look like. So the narratives that I'm talking about are transmitted in texts, but they also have a life beyond the Mahatmya text. They are transmitted in media, which are non-written forms, or I call them here non-written forms of temple legends. They are depicted or scenes of the narratives are depicted in reliefs, sculptures depict the narratives, there are murals that depict it. Then of course there's oral narratives, and that is very important. So we just were looking at this temple where you have a text put up on outside, but if you visit the deity in the temple, in this case Panamanishwara, you would bring offerings to the deity. You would go towards the Garbhagriha, the inner sanctum, and there a priest would receive you and the offerings, hand over the offerings to the main deity, and at the same time would explain to you in a very formulaic way, would explain to you give you a short version of the Sthala Mahatmya, of the temple legend, would wave the lamp in front of the deity and explain to you this God came here because this and this happened, and then this and this happened, and that's why this is here, and so on. So you, as a temple visitor, you get an idea of the narrative pertaining to this temple by simply visiting and performing your worship. So there's oral narratives, which are surprisingly stable, And then there are ritual enactments. We will see that later on. So some of the Mahatmya narratives are also performed during temple festivals. And in that way are conveyed to the local worshipper communities, but also to the pilgrims who visit the temples. They are expressed in architecture. For example, we talked about Hastigiri Mahatmya. The Hastigiri Mahatmya means the eulogy of the elephant mountain. One of the temples is called, has the name Varanasi Perumal, but at the same time is also, the name is Hastigiri. And here it is explained then why is this temple called Elephant Mountain? Because Indra once was cursed because he took a wrong decision. He was cursed to be an elephant, then was roaming around on the earth, and then Rishi told him, well, if you want to get rid of your curse, you have to go to Kanchipuram. There this will happen. So he goes to Kanchipuram and actually gets rid of his curse and can leave his elephant shell basically there. And the centerpiece of this temple is considered to be this elephant. So architecture also expresses the Mahatmya narratives. Then, of course, there are songs about the temples which take up the narrative. There are dance dramas, which are again performative expressions of the narrative. There are inscriptions that refer to these narratives, and possibly many more. And here we see on this image Kamakshi on a relief in the Kachapeshwara temple, and that is one of these reliefs that I'm talking about. That is the central narrative motive of the Kamakshi at the Ekarmanatha temple, where Kamakshi is tested by Shiva, or her devotion is tested by Shiva. She builds a sand linga and wants to worship it, but Shiva comes as a flood. And then Kamakshi embraces the sand linga to protect it from the floods. And this is the scene that we are seeing here while she's sitting under a mango tree. So these narrative motives are expressed also in these sculpture and reliefs. I will talk you to one specific temple today to make clear what we are after as a project and what we are actually looking at. The example is the Yathoktakari Perumal temple, or in Tamil Sonnavanam Sete Perumal, or as Divyadesha is also called Tiruvika. That is a Vishnu temple, which is, as you can see here, which is here in what we call, or what is called Vishnu Kanchi or Little Kanchi. And Yathoktakari, that is a Sanskrit term, and it basically means he who does what he is told. So it is a Vishnu who does what he is told, and we will soon hear why this is the case. So in all of our texts, and even in more texts, we find passages that deal with this temple. I just listed them here so that you have, I don't know, you see it, yes. At the same time, he's also dealt with in a mural, but we'll look at that later. So in order for you to understand what I will be talking about, I have to give you a short version of the basic narrative that pertains to this temple. So in general, Yathoktakari appears as a predecessor to Varadaraja. The basic story is as follows. The god Brahma wishes to see Vishnu. Remember, this is a Vaishnava tradition. Of course, Vishnu in this Vaishnava tradition is considered to be the highest god. So Brahma is full of devotion for Vishnu, but wants to see him. Doesn't manage to. He goes to the Himalayas, performs ascetic practices. Nothing happens. And then he's told by a divine voice that he has to perform 100 Ashvamedas, that is royal horse sacrifices, and then his wish will come true. Brahma, of course, thinks, wow, 100 horse sacrifices, that's quite something. But then he is told that, okay, if you go to Kanchipuram, whatever you do there has the 100-fold effect of what you do elsewhere. So go to Kanchi, then one horse sacrifice will suffice. So he is directed to Kanchi, where he shall perform this horse sacrifice. As some of you might know, Vedic sacrifice cannot be performed without the wife of the sacrificer. So unfortunately, Brahma, who has of course a wife, Saraswati, had a conflict, domestic disharmony, I would say, beforehand, and Saraswati left. She went north, or wherever she went, she's not there. So that poses, of course, a problem for Brahma, who wants to perform a horse sacrifice. So he sends his son Vasishta to call her back. Vasishta goes there, but Saraswati says, no, thank you. If you want something from me, you should come here. Well, okay, that doesn't work out. So Vasishta comes back, and then Brahma chooses a different wife or a different consort to perform the sacrifice with him. The demons, who are notoriously envious and feel really not dealt with in an appropriate manner, they see their chance, they go to Saraswati and say, hey, Saraswati, do you see what your husband is doing there? He has another wife and is performing the Ashwamedha without you. Do you like that? And she doesn't. So Saraswati becomes very furious and is determined to destroy this sacrifice. She transforms into a raging river and rushes towards the sacrificial site. And this river is called Vegavati, the fast-flowing one. Brahma, all the people of Kanchipuram see her coming, and I get really scared because everything gets dark and trees and mountains are tumbling towards Kanchipuram, so they see that's really going to be very uncomfortable. So they run to Brahma and say, Brahma, what shall we do? What shall we do? Brahma says, I don't know, let's ask Vishnu. And so they go to Vishnu and begs him, takes refuge in him, and begs him to save the sacrifice. Vishnu does as he is asked, that's why it's called Yathoktakari, and lies down across the river's path and blocks the river. The river has to go underground, and Brahma can complete his sacrifice, and in the end Vishnu appears as Mahadaraja. So that's the basic storyline. We do this basic storyline on reliefs on pillars in the Varanasi temple. So on the left side we see Brahma performing the Ashwamedha. If you look closely, this is a four-headed person that is Brahma, and he is offering into a sacrificial fire. In the middle, we see Saraswati as Vegavati. We see a running woman here with a running goddess because she has 4 arms. And there's fish and other aquatic animals which show that she is basically a water person. And the right person standing there, the small male person, might be Vasishta, who in vain tried to call her to Brahma's sacrifice. And on the right side, we see actually Vishnu appearing from the sacrificial fire while Brahma is performing the Purnahuti. And if you look very closely, you can see that here we see the dead horse of the horse sacrifice lying here. So this is a successful Ashwamedha that Brahma performed. So we have the narrative on relief in the temple, on the temple's pillars. But the narrative also corresponds, sort of corresponds to some geophysical reality. Here we have a satellite image of Kanchipuram and the two rivers that are close to Kanchipuram. On the lower river is the Pala River, and the other river that is today doesn't carry much water is here. This is Vegavati, and this river is called Vegavati. So it is Saraswati as Vegavati, and here at the shore of the Vegavati is Yathoktakari. So we can assume that these narratives also reflect or resonate some geophysical reality. And seeing that Kanchipuram's Mahatmyas are full of flood myth, we can assume that these are connected to actual experiences of flood, which are dealt with then in a narrative way. Then, where else do we see the narrative expressed? In the inner sanctum, the Garbhagriha. I cannot take pictures in the inner sanctum of the temples, so I have to show you here the stucco images of the Garbhagriha, which are in the entrance of the temple. And here you see, in fact, Vishnu lying down, blocking the river's path, and on his to his feet is a female deity who we think is Saraswati as Vegati, who actually got calmed down by Vishnu and does not destroy is not intent on destroying the sacrifice anymore. The myth is also enacted ritually in two ways. During the annual spring festival, Palavutsava of the Varanasi temple, that is a festival that is actually starting soon on the 5th of April. During this festival, it's a spring festival, the text of the myth is read out towards the deity. So here we see one member of the Tatacharya family standing here reading out the text from a palm leaf manuscript, as you can see here, towards the deity who is standing here and listening. But not only he is standing there, but we all are also standing, of course, there. So the communities are attending this festival. They hear the words of the Mahatmya. In this case, the Hastigiri Mahatmya. And in the evenings, the slow self-revelation of the god is ritual enacted. So slowly, 7 screens that are held up or tied in front of the deity, there's soft music playing, and then it becomes a dramatic enactment of the removal of the curtain, until in the end we all who are standing to witness this can see how the god reveals himself to Brahma and of course also to us. So this is also a part of the ritual enactment of the mythology that we find in the text. However, so far we have dealt with what I would say is the mainstream Brahmin traditions, but there's also other traditions, local traditions, transmitted by other communities that are as important as these traditions. Here on the left side we see Mr. Krishnamurti, who is the main priest of the Yathoktakari Mariamman temple. Her story is transmitted only orally and only among the community that serves her. But her story is as follows. She is Yathoktakari's sister, and actually originally she had a temple very close to Yathoktakari. But when Vegavati came, or Saraswati came as a raging river, she basically was swept away along with Begavati and is now situated in a different place, which we see here on the right-hand side, at the Begavati River Road, so let's say half a kilometer away from Yathoktakari. But still, today the tradition of Yathoktakari Mariamman clearly states that she is his sister. That is not recognized by the priests of the Yathoktakari temple, so they would not talk about it and would rather either not know about it or pretend to not know about it. But it is a narrative that is very important for Yathoktakari Mariamman. In the text, the narrative of Yathoktakari is also embedded in a larger narrative. So there's a larger picture, for example, in the Vaishnava Mahatmya. So in that larger picture, Yathoktakari is part of a cluster of Vaishnava temples. And these cluster of Vaishnavas or Vishnus are considered to be brothers. So Yathoktakari's older brothers are Deepa Prakasha and Ashtabhuja, and his younger brother is Varadaraja, and I try to mark them here on the map of Kanchipuram. So what's the story? This is embedded in a kind of in a story, let's say in a repetition of the motives that lead to the emergence or self-revelation of Varadaraja. So first, it's the Asuras who want to prevent Brahma from doing his sacrificial fire, and so they engulf the entire city in darkness. And then Brahma calls on Vishnu and asks him to help. Vishnu appears with a lamp in his hand, so that he appears first as Deepa Prakasha. Then there's another attempt. The demons send Sharaba, the kind of mythical animal of Shaiva tradition, to destroy the sacrifice. Again, Brahma asks Vishnu for help, and Vishnu appears as Ashtabhuja, as 8-armed Vishnu, who then fights Sharaba and of course subdues him and saves the sacrifice. Then comes Yathoktakari, his story we have heard, and finally Vishnu actually appears from the sacrificial fire, which we see here also as it is represented on the pillars of the Varadaraja temple. But we can even take one step further out of the back and see that in some texts, Varadaraja also has two brothers who are outside of Kanchipuram. I marked them here on the map. There's two Vishnu temples with Vishnus who are lying down, so on Ananta Shesha, and they are considered in these texts as predecessors to Yathoktakari. So this was in in Palikonda, that was Vishnu's first attempt to stop the raging river. He did not manage because the river avoided him. Then his second attempt was in Tirupakadal, where he was lying down again, and it did not work. And only then in Kanchipuram, it actually he was able to manage to stop Begavati. And these temples do exist. They do exist along the Pala River. At the same time, there's again, let's say, imbalance in local knowledge. So the priests from Palikonda and Tirupakadal would definitely know about the story. They would know, here he was laying down because Saraswati wanted to destroy the sacrifice. But there is not necessarily acknowledgement from the priests in the Yathoktakari temple that there were two further temples that are considered predecessors. But now let's look at a Shaiva version of the same, or this narrative. So we are in the lucky position that a 1900 print of the of one of the Tala Puranas also contains woodcuts which illustrate the stories that are transmitted in this Tamil text. And here we have the legend, the image that depicts the legend from a Shaiva perspective. Let's have a look what's happening here. So, first, there is Brahma, four-headed, performing a sacrifice with a priest, and that we can assume is the Ashvamedha that he wants to perform. Here we see, if you look closely, there's Saraswati sitting in a tree. It is somehow in the text it is said she has gone to the woods, and it's not very clear what this means. And clearly the artist who made this image was also not really sure about what it means, so he placed her in a tree. So she's there, but she's not where she should be at the sacrifice. But then she is there because she hears that he is performing the sacrifice with two other wives and comes as a raging river towards the sacrifice. Brahma calls for help, not himself, but he's sending his two consorts who pray, as you can see here, who pray to a Shivalinga. So they pray to Shiva in order for Shiva to save the sacrifice. So here in this narrative, Brahma does not approach Vishnu, but he approaches Shiva. Shiva, of course, says, okay, I can help you. And how does he help? He tells Vishnu to intervene. So in this case, Vishnu, again, is the Yathoktakari, he who does as he was told. But in this case, he was told by Shiva what to do. So here we can see a clear sectarian hierarchy, which is represented in this woodcut. And what does he do? Here you can see he lies down in the way of the river Vegavati. First she can circumvent him, but then he lies down again and by this final act and prevents Vegavati to wash away the sacrificial fire. While you might have noticed now that it really helps a lot if you look at different media of transmission, if you want to approach the complexity of such a narrative and also of its meaning for the different worshiping communities. Going into the field also, let's say, often confronts you with more questions which you might not have had if you only had stuck to your text. So this woodcut is in the Shivatana Patalam, so in the Shivastana chapter of the Kanchi Purana. And we went into the field and found then, in fact, a linga that is, however, further down the river. Here, again, an open air linga which has not yet shelter, hasn't been elevated to, let's say, a deity with his own shrine, but he's called Shivastana Linga. So what do we make of that? We're not yet sure. If you have an idea, please come up to me after the talk. So, what are we doing? First of all, we are creating digital editions with translations from palm leaf manuscripts, from early scripts, from the Sanskrit, from early prints, from the Sanskrit texts, and we interlink these editions so that if you have the mention of Yathoktakari in one edition, you can see in where else is Yathoktakari mentioned, in which context is he mentioned there. We, of course, record the geodata of the existing sites, and from all the temples that we find in the text, I would say 98% are actually still existing on the ground. There are a few temples that we haven't been able to find as of yet. Maybe they do not exist, maybe they never existed. But most of the texts, the temples are actually there, and so we record them. So we record where they are, not only the temples, but also the theaters, so the water bodies, which play also an important role. And these temple locations are then again linked to the text. So when you find a certain passage in the text, you can also see where is this in Kanchipuram exactly. Then we document the sites. We document them, of course, first of all through taking images. So we take images of the important or what we consider important features of the sites. We annotate these images. And again, if we have in the text, for example, a story of Yasa standing with his hands raised up over his hand, and we find this murti in the temple, we would link this murti image with the textual passage, with the geodata, so that you can see, okay, this is here, this is there, this is there. And sometimes it gives a more holistic image, sometimes also it confuses, of course, more. Very important is also interviews with the temple custodians, that mostly are the temple priests, but also other people who are worshipping communities, with the trustees, with the people who do service in the temples, who clean, who live around the temple, and ask them about their understanding of these Mahatmyas and what is the special, what are the special features of these temples. Also, these interviews are then tagged and interlinked with the images, with the text and with the geodata. And in the end, we're not there yet, but we will have a consolidated website where you can access through different media of transmission, where you can access through the temples, where you can access, if you're interested in, let's say, elephants, you could access the material by throwing in the keyboard word elephant. Then you would have the narrative of Indra becoming an elephant. You would have an image of the elephant mountain. You would see how these sites are connected with each other, really depending on your interests. And in that way, that is how we respond to the challenge that I mentioned in the beginning, the challenge, how do we connect these different media of transmission in a non-hierarchical way, and how do we represent that? And of course, most importantly, how do we give the user of the material access that allows them, not only allows them into this world of Sthala Mahatmyas, but also invites them in and asks them to ask questions they might not have thought of before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hüsken, for such a wonderful talk and telling us about the project. I will invite Professor Ranjit to sort of summarize and give some comments, after which we can open the floor for question and answers.
This one, yeah? No, I won't run away.
Thank you very much for such an educative experience. And I found your methodology very sound and profound in many ways. See, this has been always a problem with us, that when we visit certain sites, and especially more ancient they are, sometimes they become very distant from us so far as the semantic meaning that they can communicate to us. And there are some local guides approved by the Archaeological Reserve of India, and they tell us certain details. Very often they are unable to answer the very as some kind of a metaphorical expression saying that woods which are covered with so many other yonis, and then something like Radha's stories are also there. It's very common in Vaishnava tradition. So I think if we connect those also and put together and try to see what these meanings could have been, and over a period of time whether they have undergone any major change into the decoding of the metaphors and any new idea has come up. Because sometimes this Vaishnava and Shaiva kind of identities are not sufficient enough to explain. A lot of other give and take exchanges that have happened, and some local elements have entered at a certain point of time. So it was really wonderful. From my side, I would like to ask a question. There are a lot of enactments of mythologies which were chronologically speaking very typical of northern part of India. Gradually they have travelled towards south and they have undergone some changes also. Like this whole idea of Varanasi, it's so much related even to north, or rather that has travelled from there. May it be in the form of Vaishnava ideas, may it be in the form of some, like this whole episode of Saraswati. And Saraswati going underground, and then, and then Saraswati's connection with Brahma. Again, as you said, that sometimes these relations are also very confusing. But the origin, chronologically speaking, the origin is in the north. So if these are dated later, then how do we see that travel taking place? Because Agasti legend is something which gives us one idea about how the legends travel. Or Ramayana is another example to see how the legends have traveled. But in case of particular these places of worship, these connections need to be explored. So do you have any plan of incorporating that into your project? That's my question. And with that, probably I think Vinitaji would like to open the floor for more questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I can thank you so much for summarizing and also adding so nicely several aspects that I have not really incorporated that much. I'm happy to try to answer your question, although I would try to phrase it. If you talk to someone in Kanchipuram and tell them this all came from the north, I don't think this would fare well locally. But at the same time, what I do see is a constant back and forth between what we can call the Puranic tradition, where certain narrative motives are very prominent and are repeated in different versions time and again in the Puranas. And they then become somehow localized. So that not only the Puranic traditions, but also, let's say, Ramayana, for example. So there's what's the name? Vijayaraghava temple near Kanchipuram. This is the place where Jatayu tried to prevent Ravana, to stop Ravana abducting Sita, where he then Jatayu died and Rama performed the cremation rites for him. So there is a clear attempt to localize these stories that are, I would say, of pan-South Asian and even beyond that validity. So to say, yes, this has happened, and you know what? It happened here. So that talks, of course, towards the question of what do these Mahatmyas in general, what do they do? Why are they there? I mean, there are, of course, narratives that contribute to community identity, to local identity, to collective memory, but they also connect specific sites to a greater tradition, but they tell everyone who reads these or who comes to know about these stories to say, yeah, come here. So they are also, let's say, promotional texts. The authors of the Mahatmyas or the editors or the people who transmit it, they clearly are interested in people to come here because this happened here. And here you can also reenact what the gods have done. And this is very meritorious. Also the idea of Ashvamedas, 100 Ashvamedas is like one Ashvameda in Kanchipuram. Who wouldn't go to Kanchipuram then, right? I mean, you can save a lot of time and effort. At the same time, when you're talking about this north-south relationship that is, of course, we're in Varanasi here, there is, of course, constant reference to Kashi. So, Vegavati, the cause for the domestic disharmony was because Saraswati was saying, well, I mean, I'm the greatest river, right? So, as Vegavati, no, sorry, Ganga is greater. So, where you have constant reference to ancestor rituals performed in Kashis, but you can't do it here because here it is as good as in Kanchi. So there is, you feel a kind of competition and the need to equate the local sites with sites that are located in the north. And I do think that it's a kind of contraction. It allows people to do the same things with the same efficacy without having to go to Kashi. And maybe it's even better here. So I do think that there is this very strong attempt to connect to the greater pan-Indian tradition, but at the same time to say, but here is the best. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So are there any other questions? Archana Sharma to please felicitate Professor Hüsken on our behalf. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining for the talk. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Some students can also join in if you want.
The tea and cookies are served for you outside.